Hey everyone, Ashton here with Gents, and I've got a video for you today. So this is going to be my top 10 designer favorites of all time. And I know a lot of times reviewers, or myself even, will say, it was really hard to come up with this top 10 list. I had to sit and think about it forever. And this time I actually really mean that. This is one that I wasn't even sure I wanted to do. I started to make a list and I was like, I don't think I can do this justice. But whatever, we're gonna try it out. And there are gonna be a freaking ton of honorable mentions. I'll fly right through them when we get to them, but there will be more than two. And you guys need to understand going into this list that this is not a list of my current favorites. This is not a list of what I would necessarily choose to wear right now. This is a list of fragrances that have affected either myself or the fragrance community in huge ways, one or the other. And I tried to kind of combine that and come up with this list. So a lot of these are not going to be new releases or even newer releases. And now that you know that, we can get started. So before I tried to pare this down to 10, which was close to impossible, I had something like 40 fragrances laid out. So I'm going to run through the honorable mentions, the ones that I wanted to just bring up really quickly. L'Eau d'Issey by Issey Miyake. This has a ton of notes, but the one that it's really known for is yuzu. Yuzu is a Japanese citrus. It's kind of similar to grapefruit. It's a little bit bitter. It's fresh, really nice. It's actually one of the longer lasting citrus notes. And when this came out, it started to revolutionize the game by making that kind of citric / aquatic feel a really popular men's base. This is kind of a twofer. Yves Saint Laurent Kouros, Chanel Antaeus. And those of you out there that are aware of these fragrances know why they're together here. These are probably the two most well-known designer animalic fragrances. And the notes that are most commonly associated with animalic kind of fragrances are civet and castoreum. These are both 80s powerhouses. Some people are gonna say that these smell dated. I'm not gonna argue against that. Some people might say they smell pissy. I'm not gonna argue against that. But I will say that I really like these, and you can't go wrong with an 80s classic animalic powerhouse sometimes. Another one I wanted to bring up really quickly is Versace Pour Homme. This has lemon neroli and bergamot. It's most often compared to Chanel Allure Homme Sport, and there are definitely similarities there between this and that. This is one that was one of my dumb reaches for a long time. It's one that I could just grab and go in spring or summer. Easy to wear. All of my hardcore fans out there, you know what's coming next because I just said, you know what's coming next. It's Drakkar Noir. Oak moss, lavender, and leather. And yes, I guess it's technically dated since this came out in the 80s and smells like it came out in the 80s. I've told many stories about this fragrance. It was a huge hit in the 80s. I know that it was probably played out. You know, too many people wore it and too many people wore it too heavily. So nowadays, if you wear Drakkar Noir, you might get judged, but still, honorable mention. I still love you. Davidoff Cool Water, also known as the official designer's release version of Creed Green Irish Tweed. Technically, this came out 1 year after Green Irish Tweed, so that makes it kind of like the first Green Irish Tweed clone. Aquatic notes and lavender are the main thing here. Really, there's not too much to say about it other than it was another huge hit, a classic fragrance by this point. Now this is one that I thought about putting higher. It's one that I kind of wanted in the top 10, but it ended up getting bumped down. It is the original M7 from Yves Saint Laurent. This has been released as M7 Oud Absolu, so you can pick that up for much cheaper. There's no real reason to go out and purchase this one unless you're just a huge M7 fan. Here though, it's all about the oud. This was the first big oud designer release. As we know, oud is huge now. Every single house wants to have an oud fragrance, and this is the one that helps set that off. Last honorable mention, and like I said, this was ridiculously hard to even cut it down to this point. L'Instant de Guerlain Extreme by Guerlain, also known as LIDGE. This has cacao, anise, and patchouli. It's a chocolatey, classy, sophisticated, elegant men's cool weather fragrance. This does come in a different bottle now, which looks like this, and the classic bottle looked like that, which people pay a really big premium for. It's a fantastic fragrance. It smells great, still gets talked about nowadays, so it's one that's probably going to be considered a classic for years and years to come. So those were the honorable mentions, and that was difficult enough, so here we go. Couple things to keep in mind as we break into this top 10. There are some discontinued fragrances here. I did not exclude discontinued fragrances. And on a couple of these, I'm going to highlight a couple fragrances from the same line, but only really go into details on one. So let's start this off with number 10. This is Ralph Lauren Polo Green or Ralph Lauren Modern Reserve, either one. I include Modern Reserve because a lot of people say this is as close as you can get to the vintage Polo Green without buying a vintage Polo Green. But Modern Reserve is discontinued too, so it's not really all that easy to find either. This has pine needles, tobacco, leather, and oak moss. This is a true classic men's fragrance. Legitimately, this is something my father would wear, if my father were still alive. This is a really, really green fragrance, which you would expect. It opens up with pine needles and that moss that I talked about just now, dries down to a patchouli leather tobacco dry down. It's just an old school men's fragrance. It's a true classic. It's a cooler weather fragrance, not something you're gonna wanna wear in the middle of summer, and I would say it's not something that a younger person is gonna wanna wear either. But the influence that Ralph Lauren has had on fragrance in general is undeniable. Number 9, Hugo Boss Bottled number 6. This is possibly the first apple pie fragrance, or at least it's the first one that I'm aware of being talked about. It has vanilla, apple, and cinnamon as the main notes. It's a classic young men's scent, and the DNA is still popular, still being used, and still successful, as seen in Boss Bottled Oud. Fresh apple open leads to a nice, sweet, warm cinnamon and vanilla dry down. It's just a really versatile, great young men's fragrance. And frankly, I don't think it really smells all that dated. Number 8, I'm going to go with one that's gonna ruffle a couple people's feathers, but personally, I don't think you can really deny this fragrance. It's Dior Fahrenheit, and I'm also going to be spotlighting Fahrenheit Absolute. And I know there are gonna be people out there that say, oh, Fahrenheit smells like gasoline. Why would it smell like gasoline? And it's true, there's a little bit of a petrol vibe from the violet off the top. It's like that in Fahrenheit Absolute and Fahrenheit. More prominent in Fahrenheit though, the original. So if you don't like Fahrenheit, I apologize. Personally, I do. But I don't think you can deny the impact that the Dior Fahrenheit line has had on fragrance in general. Fahrenheit Absolute has incense, myrrh, and oud along with the violet. It's honestly a little bit toned down. It's not as brash and in your face as the original Fahrenheit is. It's woody and spicy with oud. It has that Fahrenheit DNA. It's probably the best Fahrenheit to be used in a formal situation. The big drawback there, Fahrenheit Absolute's discontinued. Either way though, the Fahrenheit line, those two in particular, number 8. Number 7, I'm going with the Vetiver fragrance, one of the first Vetiver fragrances, at least to my mind, the first one that pops into my head. It is Guerlain Vetiver. Now this is a discontinued bottle. Nowadays they look like that. It says Vetiver Tobacco and Bergamot, but the main thing you're gonna get here is the Vetiver. It's green, it's sparkly, a little bit earthy, hyper versatile. This came out in the 60s originally. It's one of the first OG Vetivers, like I said, that comes to my mind. This fragrance is still going strong decades later, and as you guys know, Vetiver is a huge note in men's perfumery, either being used as a base note or as the main note of a number of popular fragrances. So Guerlain Vetiver comes in at number 7. Vetiver is just such a huge note, and this is, like I said, the first thing that pops in my mind when I think of the original Vetiver. Not Creed original Vetiver, not that one. Number 6 is another one that gets a lot of love in the community. It used to get a little bit more than it does now, but it's still held in really high regards. It is Dior Homme Intense. The main thing that people are going to talk about with this fragrance is the iris. Iris gives off a makeup / lipstick kind of vibe. You pick that up immediately. You can smell it from the atomizer, from the first blast to the dry down. It's kind of a metrosexual fragrance. It's elegant, it's classy, very, very easy to wear formally and at night. Now Dior Homme, Dior Homme Eau, Dior Homme Sport, Dior Homme Cologne, all of those are easier to wear than Dior Homme Intense. Dior Homme Intense fits more of a particular setting than it does being a very versatile fragrance. But Dior Homme Intense is the first time that I learned to love iris. And for that, it ranks this highly. It's just a great fragrance. Number 5 is another fragrance I've talked about over and over and over on this channel. It's discontinued, unfortunately, but I love it so much it had to be ranked this highly. It's Gucci Envy. Really, you can go with any of the Gucci fragrances that were released while Tom Ford was creative director of Gucci. So that's going to be Gucci Envy, Gucci Rush, and Gucci Pour Homme, the original. Ginger, incense, and sandalwood are going to be the main notes here, and this does go for a really, really high price nowadays because of its discontinuation. If you want something very similar, but much, much cheaper, go with Carvin Homme. Envy is a really versatile gentleman type of fragrance. It's warm, it's fresh, it's spicy, it's woody. It smells fantastic. That's what ranks it so high on this list. I'm glad I already shot that. Number 4, we've got one that's a little bit more of a modern classic. It is La Nuit by Yves Saint Laurent. This has cardamom and lavender as 2 of the main notes, and this is really well known for being a great date night fragrance. It's very aromatic, warm, and spicy, and this fragrance is the first thing that comes to most people's minds when they hear the note cardamom. Very versatile, especially at night and in cooler weather. It's a compliment magnet if you're after that kind of thing. And across the entirety of the L'Homme spectrum, L'Homme, La Nuit de L'Homme, all the flankers, this one is most well known. It's had so many flankers and so many spin-offs. I don't really think you can underestimate the effect that that has had. And now we've reached the top 3. Coming in at number 3 is going to be another one that I consider to be a little bit of a modern classic, and it is Dolce Gabbana's The One, specifically the Eau de Toilette, but if you wanted to go with the Eau de Parfum, that's fine too. Amber, tobacco, and ginger are 3 of the most prominent notes here, and this is another one that is just a fantastic date night fragrance. And no lie, the first time I smelled this, I thought it smelled amazing. It was one of the best smells that I had ever smelled the first time that I checked this out. It does have weak performance, but it has a tendency to draw people in and make them want to get a little bit closer to you. So, like I said earlier, in date night situations, works perfect. It's one that I'm going to look back on fondly. It's one that I'm going to always have in my collection. Comes in at number 3. Number 2 is the fragrance that really started to get me into collecting and learning more about fragrances when I was about 18 years old. It's one of the biggest releases that has ever been. The impact that it's had on the fragrance business in general cannot be overstated. It is Giorgio Armani Acqua di Gio. Main notes here are marine notes, citrus, and white flowers. And this was just an absolute beast, an absolute force in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's still going strong today with Acqua di Gio Profumo, Acqua di Gio Essenza, Acqua di Gio Profumo Special Edition, on and on and on. It's just a true classic at this point. I know that it's only about 20 years old, but it's definitely a classic. That was like the original Sauvage. It set off a firestorm. Everybody wanted to have it. Everybody wanted to smell it. Acqua di Gio, number 2. That brings me to number 1, which I'm sure some people will disagree with me. Some people will agree with me, but I chose Bleu de Chanel by Chanel. This has grapefruit, incense, and ginger. And yeah, it didn't come out all that long ago in 2010, but the effect that this has had is still being felt today, very, very, very strongly. It's a hyper versatile compliment getter. When this came out, it was bagged in the community. People said it was generic, that it wasn't any good, and now look where it is. It's been one of the top 2 sellers every year since it came out. People love it, and it has inspired literally every single fragrance house out to put out their version of Bleu de Chanel. So a lot of you out there are going to really hate it for that, but it's just had an enormous impact. And that is also one of my best dumb reach fragrances. You really can't go wrong with Bleu de Chanel. You can wear it in literally any situation. It's mature enough that you can wear it in a suit and tie, but it's casual enough that you can wear it out to your friends, to a bar. It covers literally everything imaginable. So number 1, Chanel, Bleu de Chanel. If you've stayed this long, thank you for watching. I know this was a really, really long video. And I may come out with my personal top 10, like the top 10 fragrances that I would choose to wear nowadays. But if we're talking all time, it has to be this. Because I can tell you, the first time I smelled each one of these fragrances that I've listed, I had a legitimate reaction to where I was blown away by some facet of the fragrance. And you can smell 1,000 different fragrances and only have that happen a handful of times. Let me know some of your favorites of all time in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.